Welcome to the Developer Spotlight on the Full Dive Gaming Podcast. In Developer Spotlight, we sit down with VR industry professionals. This week, we are sitting down with Loic Claveau, CMO of Victoria VR. Loic, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We're very excited, and while we're saying thank you, of course, we got to thank the sponsor of today's podcast, Asterion Products. If you don't know them already, they make gorgeous VR headset stands. I've got one in the background. It's customized with my logo. You can put your headset on there. It'll keep it stored and charged up for you. Check them out on Amazon. If you use code FULLDIVE10, you can get another 10% off on their products. We're here to talk about Victoria VR. Victoria VR, for those of you out there who don't know, is touted as the world's first realistic metaverse. Loic, will you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so basically Victoria VR, it's a project that was born in 2018 from the mind of Andre and Adam, our two co-founders. And basically the idea was to, in simple terms, to recreate Ready Player One, but within a digital world, right?
Nice.
Inside the real world, I would say. And so the idea was to create not only a metaverse, which is kind of what we're trying to reproduce after Ready Player One, but also part games, right? So there would be a game within there, like a MMORPG, and so you can come and have a lot of different activities. And the metaverse side of things is more like experiencing something, right? Different type of activities, may it be fitness, may it be transactional. You can buy stuff, you can experience stuff, kind of like we would expect as a real life. So actually, Adam liked to define the metaverse as a kind of like a representation of it's a 3D internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our metaverse is not only kind of like a 2D platform, but it's also natively designed for virtual reality, right? We are on Oculus Quest 2, because we like the fact that there's no, you can have like a freedom of movement, of course limited to a certain space, but still you don't have a plug that connect you to the PC. So that's kind of like, that's what one of the mandatory things. And basically it all started when Andre, who is the tech guy, the genius tech, was like, okay, the tech is there now to be able to create this type of stuff. And of course, blockchain being the technology that it is and what it allows, with true ownership, NFTs and all of that, it was the right match, the right moment for them to go, okay, let's go for it, right? Let's start this project and let's see where we can go with it.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds very ambitious. I've got to say, when you bring up the Ready Player One, I really like that idea, because when we think about current companies that kind of like people are looking at like it's a metaverse, it's in Ready Player One, it was like your whole life. It wasn't just some games or some things to do. It was like people were getting married, they were going on vacation, they were getting divorced. All these things were happening in there. And it sounds like your ambitions are definitely more towards that than just a big world that also has games and other stuff to do. So we've heard of a couple other metaverse companies, one called Solospace VR, which I don't know if you've heard of them, because they kind of have a similar idea. They actually were supposed to come on the podcast twice now and didn't show up either time. So I guess we're never going to hear about them.
Or maybe after they will decide to actually join us. Yeah.
Have you heard of Solospace?
Yeah, very quickly. I always kind of like scan around what's happening. So I think that they started not too long ago, something like that. And there seems to be, I wish them all the luck, and all the best for their project. They seem to be as well chasing some sort of a real life, but in the digital space, kind of like, that seems to be their dream as well. So metaverse, as we discussed very briefly before, everyone is developing a metaverse now. It's the new buzzword. So, and again, it's not really, everyone has a different definition of what a metaverse is, right? So for us, the real metaverse has a virtual reality component right? It's like you reach the full immersion, right? It's it's almost what what's called the suspension of disbelief, right? It's like your brain doesn't make the difference anymore with the real world, or at least it at this moment where you're experiencing the something, the brain doesn't know that you are actually outside, yet you are not in there in this experience, right? When the brain cannot make the difference, then that's where I think that we are. There's something, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of presence, and something that I read about a lot, when I moved into that industry, and I was very fascinating. The fact that the presence concept is defined as almost as when you remember where you were when you did that thing or that activity, whatever. Um, that's when you get the true concept of like where you truly immersed or not. So, for example, if you had a very good experience playing a game, you remember yourself sitting at the desk playing the game. So you remember yourself into the real world. But if you are, for example, in the metaverse, like in a VR world, and then you do something, you will remember that as that moment. Whatever you saw, you will remember. You will not remember yourself wearing a headset and actually experiencing that, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and which kind of like push us or encourage us to think that okay, VR is a true step within towards true immersion, and that concept is for us the real metaverse.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because it makes me think about how we've heard these studies about, young children not being able to differentiate from a VR experience from real life. So we're talking about having that be something that adults experience where, maybe they can still remember, like, okay, I know that was in VR, but the memory of playing that game or having that experience still is experiencing that moment and not thinking about having the headset on. So that's really interesting. It's like I feel like you have to really go far in immersion to be able to get to that with adults, and maybe kind of bringing back that kid brain of we're
Yes.
accepting this as
I mean,
reality.
it's very funny because we were in London just last week, actually, where we were at the Eurogamer Expo, like EGX, and so we had the headset on our booth, and we had a lot of people coming and trying part of our games and whatnot. And the kids that came and experienced, they were like getting it after like literally 5 seconds, right? They were immersed immediately, doing the hoverboard and all of that, and you could feel they were deep in there, right? There's some kid like came back 2 or 3 times, just to keep experiencing it. But yeah, there were the interesting thing as well is that you see the emotion, even though people have a headset, right? But you see the face and the lower part of the face, and you see people smiling, and you see people like wow, wow, amazing, expressing themselves. So yeah, that's when you know that you're kind of on the right track, or at least you hope you're on the right track.
That's so interesting. That's a Stanford study that saw that in kids, and people sometimes cite that as like a reason we should be weary of VR. But it's interesting because to you, it's almost more like a goal is to get to that point where people are fully believing this digital presence. And I actually have an experience where when I was really first doing a lot of VR, I remember we were watching a movie and they were like stuck in this tense survival situation, and my brain then thinking was like, oh, I too have been in a situation like that. So I'm kind of empathizing. I'm understanding what's going on with the characters. And then I thought to myself, I was like, what am I thinking right now? I've never been in a situation. And I had to trace the thought back. And it was to, I think it might have been Robinson, The Journey, this game where you're like stuck on this old Earth with dinosaurs, and my brain had actually started to think of that memory as like a time I had gone through this situation rather than just sitting there playing a game. And that was a time when I was like, wow, this, if we can get to that point where you kind of believe these experiences, it can be really powerful, but it could also be a little risky when it comes to like horror games and stuff.
Yes, like me,
True.
for example, for me, the first time I really experienced VR was maybe 5, 6 years ago or something like, maybe even more than that, and I was just not convinced. I was just like, okay, that's a bit gimmicky. It's fun, but there's nothing really. I can tell I'm not getting super immersed into it. Of course, the content was not there, the games were not there, and stuff. But then, as I got with Victoria VR, I really deep dive in it, and now I'm like, I love it. The amount of experience, like I'm doing my fitness with Thrill of the Fight and these type of games like Creed, and then my brain, like, I cannot do fitness. I'm too bored. Right, I cannot just lift stuff. I'm like getting bored, but I wear the headset and then I do boxing for an hour. Not problem, no problem. My brain just kick in. So yeah, it's amazing. I think VR like came a long way, and we're just starting.
Yeah.
And I see
sure.
games now, a ton of games that are released on a daily basis. So
yeah, we've been talking a lot about how we're kind of on the brink of like a new moment, like a new type of internet, a new type of experience for people. So it's a really exciting time for sure. I am interested to hear, because we've talked, about Meta's Metaverse, Solospace, all these different companies. And you kind of talked about what Metaverse means to you. But what sets Victoria VR apart from other companies' metaverse spaces? What makes it different than all those other companies?
So I guess again, depending on the definition that you give a metaverse, we truly believe that we're not, of course, the only metaverse out there, but we are in the upper bracket because there's this VR part of it, right? If you are developing a world in VR, for us, it doesn't mean just Victoria VR, but there's other game studio that develop that as well. But for us, that means you are building a metaverse, right? Now, the thing is, because it's a buzzy world now, everyone kind of like can claim that they are a metaverse, or everyone kind of see metaverse everywhere, right? So for example, one of the best example that I see lately is people calling Fortnite a metaverse. Right? I love Fortnite, but I do not think it's a metaverse. I think it's a battle. I mean, if we play the battle royale part, it's a battle royale game. It's a online game and multiplayer game. You're not living a life. You're not just playing. But I understand probably where people come from, in a sense that there is this sense of they are mixing a lot of things from the outside world, right? Dragon Ball, Spider-Man, Marvel, whatever. They have such a cross marketing, cross promotion. They're bringing so many verses into their world that maybe that's why people call it a metaverse, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's correct. We don't pretend that we have the truth of it, but according to our definition, that would not be the metaverse. But everyone is entitled to say, hey, I think that this is a metaverse because XYZ, right? But it's interesting because uh, before Meta renamed itself, or before Facebook renamed itself Meta, nobody claimed to be a metaverse, right?
Right.
And then suddenly, so we called ourselves Metaverse back in 2018, but then suddenly it became a thing, and then everyone is now Metaverse, right? So
You're right.
It's funny that you mention Fortnite, because we had a developer on recently that said Fortnite is not even a game, it's a store.
Yeah, so it's an e-commerce platform, basically.
Yeah, I mean that's a little bit. It's a free-to-play game, so people need to understand that free-to-play game can
Right.
only survive with a store.
Yep.
That's I mean, I come from I worked at Riot Games on League of Legends, so that's probably
Oh,
the top of what you can imagine in terms of store. But there's also, I mean, it's a free-to-play. The
yeah.
amount of enjoyment and fun you get out of the game without any need to buy, which is the same for Fortnite, is just like there's no match, right?
Right.
So you can say whatever you want, but I think these are extremely good games.
Yes.
With a very well understanding of what sells and why not, skins and stuff like it doesn't affect the gameplay, right? So it's very different from the free to play that actually are very predatory in their
Right.
practices. Mobile games are mainly, I would say, most of them are the culprit there. Like they push you. You need, if you want to progress, you need to pay.
Yeah, those can be
Not all of
dangerous.
them, but
Yeah, there's
there's a
those out
sense
there
of
for sure.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's just so many companies. They're all trying to make money in their own way, but some of them just seem so slightly evil at times in the way they do it. And of course, when we talk about that, we got to talk about Meta, which is formerly Facebook. They've been kind of known to buy out all their competition. They're getting pushback from the FCC and other areas. But how would you respond if Meta was like, hey, we like what you're doing. We would like to buy Victoria VR?
Well, to be honest, that is absolutely not my realm. And actually, I enjoy staying away from all this discussion. That's definitely the business part. And I'm more like marketing, kind of like. So I don't know. Actually, that's it would definitely be flattering. That's for sure. But I have no idea because there are definitely pros and cons to this, and I guess it depends what at that moment the company is trying to do with itself, right? Do they try to scale? Do they try to, I don't know. So but yeah, I mean, it's always kind of like a question out there, right? And it's not only Meta, right? We've seen other companies that are trying to go into VR, right? AR, VR, Apple, Microsoft, even Google, and so yeah, it's interesting, but unfortunately, I do not have a clear-cut answer for you.
Well, you've talked about Victoria VR being available on Quest 2,
Yes.
and it's in alpha testing.
Yes.
When do you see Victoria VR fully releasing to VR headsets, and will it be released on more than the Quest?
Yeah. So basically, as we said, right now we are in alpha stage, private alpha stage, meaning that we have, it's limited in the amount of players that you can have on the Oculus at the same time. So we have roughly 160 plus, 168 players, right? And so we are in alpha stage. We are gonna rotate people. So had more to that. Then we have other key bits that we want to hit, right? We are not only a metaverse, a game, and so on. We're also a blockchain project, right? So we have land sale, we have land that are NFTs, and therefore we are planning to reveal to the people who bought their land, where you located and stuff like that. So that takes time. And as for the final release, it will probably take some time. But we did the mistake before of announcing our dates, and that just doesn't work. That's just not a game. That's not just how a game works or a game is developed, right? So we rather be loose, and we will inform people of our progress. We will kind of like, that's what I'm building right now, like a content pipeline to show people, hey, this is what we're developing, this is what's coming down. But in terms of timeline, it's more like we have this. The next step is definitely the land reveal. Then we will have later the beta stage coming in, and then we'll see as well, right? We'll see how people react to it, right? We'll be very foolish to tell ourselves, oh, in 6 months we do that, in 1 year we do that. And no, it doesn't work like that, because you test and people's like, oh, we don't like that part, we don't like that part, and you have to go back to the drawing board, right? So it's better, I think, to just take one step at a time and bring people along on the journey and just try to inform them about what we're working on, right? And then when we come to the point where we are, what in the AAA we call like a golden version, which is kind of like where all your features are working, everything is pretty much there, then you feel comfortable about releasing a date, basically, or rather informing about the release date.
Yeah, that makes sense. Don't want to have something come out that's not ready, or, not
Yeah,
deliver on what you're saying, because
exactly. You say, hey, it's in six
Mhm.
months, and in 6 months after, hey, sorry, we miscalculated. It's going to be another 6 months, and then for whatever reason, 6 months later, you can't make it, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we know QA. If you've been part of QA, you know what I'm talking about, right? This one bug that get fixed and then trigger 100 other bugs that break the system. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh my god, we didn't plan for this. Yeah, well, it
Right.
happened.
Yeah.
Oh, you brought up blockchain in there, and I'm just thinking
Uh-huh.
it's come up on our podcast a few times. But for some of our listeners out there who aren't too familiar with what that means, you want to give us a brief explanation?
Yes. So blockchain is basically the latest cutting edge, technology that is involving what's called Web3. So basically, it's the evolution of the internet as we know it right now. So Web 2 was, for example, the big guys, the Meta, the Google. It's big data, right? But it's big data that belongs to these companies, basically, that they take your data and they do whatever they want with it, right? So I'll be quite simple, but basically that's how it is. Like, you do not own your data. Web3 and blockchain comes in when it comes into play. Suddenly you own your own data, right? You're the one in charge of your data, but also you are it's a system that is permissionless, meaning that you do not need to have a third party person, you know, and it's a well, rather that's the trustless part of it, right? And then it's something that is immutable, and I think that's one of the main thing, is that every transaction is immutable, meaning that you cannot change it once it registered into the blockchain. Then you cannot change it, right? So it's always there. So it's very impressive, because for everything that is financial market and all of that, before, there was no idea, no transparency. You had no idea where the money was coming from, where it was going and stuff like that. But now everything is registered into the blockchain, right? So there's a ton of different things that blockchain allows. It allows NFTs, for example, which means that for the first time you have true ownership of a digital thing, right? A digital item, right? Because when it's been created, it's been registered into the blockchain, and you can go back to the very first iteration and see very first transaction, sorry, and see, okay, this was the wallet, so therefore the person that owned it. And then you see, for example, if somebody sold it on the second market and whatever, 3, 4, 5, 10 times, doesn't matter. You follow the crumbs and you can see who is that last person that actually owns it. And it means that you have this true ownership. So it's very interesting, because now a lot of artists, musicians, like painters, try to get onto the blockchain, basically, on one of the blockchains, and try to create things. And there's a lot of NFT based on artists and so on. So yeah, it's very fascinating. It's very
Yeah.
interesting.
It's kind of like if there was a virtual version of when someone creates a painting and they sell it, every buyer were to write their name on the back, so you could always see that. Is that
Exactly. But then you could forge it, right? Somebody could forge the signature and pretend that Rembrandt, but it's so that it would inflate the value, right? But with the blockchain, you can't do that. You can't do that because every time there's a modification, it's registered. And it gives to a lot of very, very interesting experiment. Like, I don't know if we have the time, but I'll give you this example where a painter, for example, a pretty famous painter, wanted to do an experiment. So what he did is that he drew on his canvas in the real world. He drew a drawing, and then he made a digital version of it, the NFT, and then he sold the canvas, or rather the art, right, the piece. And now the interesting thing is that he asked the people, well, you have a choice. This piece will be unique. So either you want to get the physical art, and then I will send you, once you bought it, I will send you, but then I will destroy the digital one, or you actually get to keep the digital and I will burn the real painting. And if I remember correctly, quite a lot of people choose the digital version, and he burned the real one. And I think it gives, it's fascinating basically, and it's quite interesting because suddenly the real value is in the digital item, right? So
yeah, it's super interesting. And where there's all this discussion about NFTs and blockchain going all over the place, and I want to hear more about Victoria VR using VR tokens as currency. Does that relate? Is that a blockchain thing?
Yes.
Just tell us more about it and how it works.
Yes, so basically Victoria VR created its own cryptocurrency, which is the VR token. And then the idea is that this token, so right now you can do what you can regularly do in crypto, which is called DeFi, to decentralized finance, which is basically you can stake it's like an account, right? You stake your coin, so you put them aside, you log them into an account, and then they give you yield over year, right? Percentage over the years. So that's one part. The other part, though, is that we want to include we want our world and the economy of our world to be reliant on the VR token, right? So that means that this token becomes the sole currency of our world. If you want to do something, then you get, let's say you do activities, for example, you get rewarded in VR token, for example, right? And the important thing is that these VR token have an equivalent with fiat money, right? Which is called fiat is the dollar, the euro, the pound, and all of that. There's an equivalence. So that means that potentially you can earn a little bit of money, right? Because you earn some of this token and you can re-inject them into the game. You can use them to buy resources, for example, within the game and so on, to buy things in the game. But you can also decide to extract them out of the world and get some real money for it. So it's what we called play and earn money, right? The concept is that, because you probably, to be totally honest, there's been a big kind of like trend happening in the last year, I would say, something like that, of play to earn money, right? Some games like Axie Infinity, Pegaxi, some of these games, they came and they say, hey, you're gonna come play our game. It's like work. You're gonna make money, right? But of course, there's with everything, when it relates to money and stuff, for somebody to win, somebody has to lose, right? So it was a bit kind of like detrimental to the whole system and to the whole genre, I would say. So we switch from that notion of you don't come to play and enjoy, you come to play to make money, right? We don't like this concept. So for us, it's more of the concept of play and earn, meaning that there is a component where you can potentially earn money, but what is important is the play part, right? That's the first part. What you need to come here because you want to be here. You want to be part of this world. You want to engage with people, participate socially into the game. And yes, there is also a little component that makes you earn some money, because potentially you could open a business within our world. And that's the metaverse part, right? You could potentially open some sort of any type of business. You can open work, you can open consulting firm or whatever, right? Because that's the idea that we have, which is we create like a world, right? Victoria VR, the capital, you have the capital city and you have the suburb around it, and it's a world. So it's an extension, a virtual extension of a real world. You travel over there and you do things over there. And that can be the same thing that you do in the real world.
I like that. I like that you're bringing up about the real world because I'm curious. I've actually been doing Supernatural every day. It's a VR fitness app for the last 2 months. You talked about using Thrill of the Fight. So what does a day look like in the world of Victoria VR? Can someone do all their things in just Victoria, or are you imagining people still using other apps in tandem with it?
Yeah, there's gonna be a spectrum of things to do. The idea for us is that we want to build a world where everybody feel comfortable, however deep they want to be, right? We're not here to judge people like, hey, no, we don't think you should, play more than an hour or, or something like that. It's more like we are giving options and experiences so that potentially people would be able to do whatever they want, and that's our idea. So, for example, you could go in there and do fitness the same way you do it on other app, right? But the idea is, of course, at first, being a addendum. It's more like a how you call it? It's cumulative experience, right? It's not replacing. We do not think that we're going to replace the real world, and we don't want that either, right? But it's more like when you want to get somewhere, do something that you cannot necessarily do in the real world, then we are here for you. Let's say, for example, you want to open an office and you want to work with your friends, or you want to reach out to somebody that and have a meeting or something like that, then you could potentially do it, right? You would be in the virtual world, in your office, you open your office, your consulting office, and you have your client coming, and they have their VR headset, and one is in Japan, and you are in the US, and then, you work on the whiteboard and stuff like that. But that means that at the end of the conversation, for example, you're like, hey, I'm going to go out a little bit, and I'm going to go and do my fitness, right? Or I'm going to do something else. I'm going to get some entertainment. I'm going to do some shooting games or something like that, right? And you can do that because you are in that world, right? So, for example, you were on your plot of land that you bought, and then that's where your office is. So people came in here, whatever, teleported to your place and so on. And then you're done with that. Now you're going to have fun. You teleport, for example, into the main city, and then you go and have your fun, right? You could potentially go out to the nightclub and having some fun, dancing and stuff like that. Because, well, what do you need for that? Do you need music, sound? You need a nice visual. It's in your headset, and maybe some friends that come along, and you can have fun. I don't know if you heard about. I don't know if you experienced. I tend to refer back to that, but I experienced the concept of silent disco. Have you heard? Have you experienced that? So it changed my perspective on the social part of dancing, for example. I always kind of like the same as everybody, a believer of like, hey, dancing when you go to the nightclub is to, be with your friend and this and that, It's not really about discussing mainly, but it's about exchanging your vibe and excitement and stuff. And then when I lived in the UK, I got invited in the silent disco. And my first reaction was like, oh, this is weird, right? Because you see people dancing, but there's no music, right? And I think it's similar to that because you look at people, you're like, this is weird. You have these people, one is dancing rock, the other one is dancing rave or whatever, techno and stuff. And you're like, man, this is crazy. And then it's because you are not part of this experience, right? You don't have the headset on your head, but then you put the headset, right? And you choose your channel, and then you're in the discotheque. right? You have the music. And the amazing thing is that we want to have a conversation. You signal that to the guy, you just remove your headset, and you're discussing as if you were in a bar or in a restaurant. It's you hear few tapping, people dancing, but that's it. So you have the best of both worlds, and it became absolutely like I was absolutely addicted to it. And every time they were coming in town, I was like, let's go to silent disco because it's a different experience. And I think there is a correlation there with virtual reality because again, where the music was the headset, here is the whole experience is the headset, right, on the eyes. And you can bring people in. Of course, if your mother comes up and look at you dancing with your headset, they'll go like, you look stupid. Yeah, of course. But for you, when you are inside and hell, if she was putting her own headset and joining you into the discotheque where you're dancing, the experience would be totally different for her as well. So I think it's a fascinating part of that. We
Yeah.
are, there's a lot of prejudice that comes in. It's like, oh my God, you look like, how many times did I hear that? My mother think I look weird. She saw me playing box, video of me playing Thrill of the Fight with my headset. She's like, okay, that's weird. But I'm like, yeah, but you're not inside. You don't see what I see.
It's a good point, and I think it's something we need to get over. Like, I think that what makes it happen for people is if the game is good enough and it's immersive enough, they're not going to care what they look like on the outside.
Exactly.
So it's a measure of how good something is, whether people are still worried about how they look on the outside to people.
Mm-hmm. I think that
you have a lot
us...
of commercial now, like that, where you have the people, in the train, suddenly, boop, they pop the thing and then they start dancing, but they dance to their music and other people, look at them like, oh my God, weirdo and stuff like that. But doesn't matter. That person is in the vibe, right? In their own experience. So
yeah, I think that brings us back to when we were talking about, the kids that try VR and they're, smiling and have this reaction. They're not thinking about what's on the outside. And so bringing that to everybody, if we can have a good enough, immersive enough experience, everyone can experience that where they're not thinking about how weird they look or whatever. They're just in this virtual world. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's so exciting. And I think we're just in a very exciting time right now with all these, Web3, blockchain, NFTs, VR moving in this really exciting direction. And
one thing that is like we say that we have a realistic metaverse, right? But people tend to think, oh, okay, it's just a real world, right? But that's not how we necessarily see it. Realistic is a certain degree of quality and a certain degree of, like, we're not blocky, for example, or voxel or stuff like that. But there's also, it doesn't mean that it needs to be accurate or one-to-one to the reality, right? We could have avatar that are animals, avatar that you could play an animal, an alien, you could have laser, things like that. It's not incompatible with what we call realistic, right? It's more like in the it's like high quality graphics, basically, and as close as you could imagine and see in the real world. But we're building a world where your brain can relate, and it goes back to the suspension of disbelief. But it's just, we're not trying to copy the real world and abide by its physics. On the contrary, we are creating a world where you maybe have a dimensional pocket, right, where you enter a little door and suddenly you have a castle, right? So that allows us, the metaverse, actually, the digital world allows us to remove all these physical constraints, right? So we'll be silly just not to go there.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's been a very interesting conversation. We've gone into some really cool concepts. Is there anything else that you're working on that we didn't cover that you'd like to share today?
I mean, we just briefly talked about it, but the concept in NFT again, the concept of VR lens that we have. So we sold digital properties, right? So we have digital assets which are NFT, and I think it's a cool concept because it allows these lens. When you purchase them, they will allow you to be creative, to create whatever you want on these lens, right? You can create your own experience. So it's not only us creating experience for people, but it's also people creating experiences for other people, right? And I like the concept as well, which also will give you resources. So it's like a plot of land that extract resources for you that you can sell or you can re-inject to buy, like whatever how is it called, a windmill, for example, right? That will produce something for you, or a lumber yard that will extract wood for you at a higher cadence and stuff like that. So there's all this aspect which is almost kind of like a builder, where you can use to build your house if you want to build your house, or build anything you want. So I think it's a pretty cool aspect of Victoria VR that we are really looking forward to people trying this part.
Yeah, I'm excited to at some point hopefully get my eyes in it and see what it's like. I just want to say though a huge thank you for coming on and chatting. Of course, if you're out there listening, there's going to be links in the description, the show notes, that you can learn more about Victoria. But Loic, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I feel like I've been speaking quite a lot. I'm sorry for that.
No, you're here to tell us about what you're doing. So you've done exactly the right thing. And I actually learned a lot today myself. So I appreciate that, and our listeners do too. If you're out there listening to this podcast, remember, you can also come here, see some of these examples, see Loic here. I'll try to see if I can find some silent disco clips to put in the video so you can see what that's about, because I'm curious myself. I want to go see this now.
But again, you need to experience it.
Yes.
It's way better than looking at picture.
We need both. So
yeah.
Yeah. If you're out there, and of course, if you're already here watching us on YouTube, remember, you can take us anywhere you want to go. We're on all major podcast platforms. And if you've been thinking about VR for a while, this might be time to just dive on in.
Dive on in.